The first time I failed, I was convinced it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The weight of disappointment settled deep in my chest, and I carried it like an invisible chain. The second time, it felt heavier, like proof that I wasn't meant to succeed. The third time, I stopped counting, and by then failure had become a familiar shadow, one I couldn't outrun. I have spent 50 years chasing dreams, making mistakes, losing everything and starting over. 50 years waking up with the same burning question: was it all worth it? And for 50 years, I've watched others, some who rose, some who crumbled, each one searching for the same answer. I used to think success was a straight road. Work hard, stay focused, push through the struggle, and one day you'll make it. That's what they tell you, isn't it? That's what we're all taught. But if that were true, why did I fail over and over again? Why did the hardest working people I knew end up with nothing while others, barely lifting a finger, had everything? For years, I thought failure was a punishment, a sign that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, capable enough. I spent nights staring at ceilings, questioning every decision, every step, every risk. And then one day I met a man. He was older, wiser, with eyes that had seen more than I could imagine. He had failed more times than I had even tried. And in the final moments of his life, he whispered just 5 words. 5 words that changed everything I thought I knew about failure, about life, about what it truly means to succeed. You might think you understand failure, you might believe you've seen the worst of it. But before this is over, I promise you, failure is nothing like what you think it is. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at failure the same way again. I still remember my first failure like it was yesterday. The kind that doesn't just bruise your ego, but shakes something deep inside you, something you thought was unbreakable. I had poured everything into it, my time, my energy, my heart. I had mapped it all out, step by step, certain that I had done everything right. I was young, ambitious, and convinced that success was a matter of effort. Work hard, they said. Be disciplined, they said. Keep going, and you'll make it. And so, I worked, I planned, I sacrificed sleep, missed birthdays, turned down every distraction. I gave it everything. And then, it collapsed before my eyes, not slowly, not in a way that gave me time to prepare, no warning, no signs, just a sudden, brutal unraveling. One day it was there, the next it was gone. I can still hear the phone call, the voice on the other end, calm, detached, explaining how everything I had worked for was no longer mine. The walls of my world caved in with a few simple words. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands numb, my mind trying to grasp onto something, anything to make sense of it. But there was nothing left to hold on to. I had failed. And failure, when you least expect it, when you believe in something so deeply, isn't just a setback. It's a reckoning. It's a mirror held up to everything you thought you were. It makes you question everything. Your choices, your intelligence, your worth. I was angry. Not at the world, not even at the people who walked away from me the moment things fell apart. I was angry at myself. Because in my mind, failure was something that happened to other people, the ones who weren't prepared, the ones who didn't work hard enough, the ones who took shortcuts, not me. And yet there I was, broke, exhausted, sitting in a tiny apartment with bills I couldn't pay, plans I couldn't follow through on, and a silence so loud it felt deafening. I told myself I would bounce back, that this was just a moment, just a phase, that failure wouldn't define me. But the truth was, it already had. Because something happens after you fail, after you give everything and still lose. A voice starts to whisper in your ear. Maybe you were never meant to succeed. Maybe this is all you'll ever be. Maybe it's time to give up. And once you hear that voice, it's hard to silence it. It follows you. It creeps into your thoughts when you're alone. Reminds you of everything you lost when you try to sleep. It becomes the weight in your chest when you wake up, the hesitation in your step when you try again. It stays with you. I thought my life was over. That all the years I had spent building something meant nothing. That I had wasted time I would never get back. And when you're standing in the ruins of something you believed in, it's hard to imagine anything beyond that moment. I wanted to disappear, to walk away and never have to explain what had happened. Because failure isn't just painful, it's humiliating. You see it in the eyes of the people who once believed in you. You hear it in the way they speak to you differently, softer, like you're fragile, like you need their pity. And worst of all, you start to see yourself through their eyes. And nothing is more dangerous than that. But here's the thing about failure. It isn't the end of the story. It just feels that way when you're in it. I didn't know it then, but that moment, sitting there, drowning in my own doubt, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The hidden truth about failure. For years, I believed failure was the opposite of success. That if I failed, it meant I wasn't good enough. That every wrong step, every rejection, every broken plan was proof that I was moving further away from the life I wanted. I was wrong. Failure isn't the enemy of success. It is the process of success, the foundation upon which every great achievement is built. But we aren't taught that, are we? We are raised to fear failure, conditioned to avoid it at all costs, told that it's a sign of weakness, of incompetence, that those who failed simply weren't smart enough, strong enough, prepared enough. So we become careful. We hesitate. We second-guess every decision, afraid to take risks, afraid to lose, afraid to face that unbearable feeling of falling short. And in that hesitation, we become trapped, not by failure itself, but by the fear of it. I spent years running from failure, afraid to try again because I couldn't bear the weight of another disappointment. And in doing so, I wasted the most valuable resource I had, time. Time that I will never get back. And then one day, I started looking at the world differently. I stopped focusing on the people who had already succeeded and started paying attention to how they got there. And what I found changed everything. The most successful people in history were also the ones who failed the most. Failure is a teacher, not a punishment. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas Edison. A man who failed more than 1,000 times before he invented the light bulb. Imagine that, 1,000 failures. 1,000 nights of doubt, frustration, exhaustion. 1,000 moments where he could have walked away, convinced himself it wasn't meant to be. But he didn't. And when they asked him about those failures, do you know what he said? I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that won't work. That was the moment I understood. Failure isn't a dead end. It's a lesson. Every time you fail, you are learning. What doesn't work, what needs to change, what you must do differently. Every failure is a stepping stone leading you closer to success. But only if you keep going. Success is built on the foundation of repeated failures. Think of the greatest athletes, the greatest inventors, the greatest minds in history. Do you know what they all have in common? They lost. They fell. They were rejected, doubted, ridiculed, and still, they kept moving forward. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, was cut from his high school basketball team. Imagine that. A boy who would one day become a legend was once told, "You're not good enough." He could have stopped right there, accepted it as fact, let the disappointment swallow him whole. But instead, he trained harder, pushed himself further, turned his failures into fuel. And that's why, years later, he would say, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I was trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. That is why I succeed, not in spite of failure. Because of it. The myth of lucky people. They just failed more than you. We love to believe in luck, in the idea that some people are just destined to succeed while others are meant to struggle. That success is handed out like a gift, reserved for the chosen few. But luck has nothing to do with it. The truth is, the people we call lucky have simply failed more times than we ever have. Take Steve Jobs, fired from his own company, laughed out of boardrooms, told that Apple was a lost cause. If he had given up then, if he had let failure define him, the world would have never seen the iPhone, the iPad, the technology that reshaped the future. Or Oprah Winfrey, fired from her first job as a TV anchor because she was unfit for television. Or Walt Disney, rejected by multiple investors, told he lacked imagination. Imagine that, being told that you lack imagination only to go on and create something that would inspire generations. These people weren't lucky, they just didn't stop. They failed, and they failed, and they failed again, and every time they learned, adapted, grew, until finally they didn't fail anymore. If you want to succeed in life, you must be willing to fail more times than anyone else. I wish someone had told me this earlier. Maybe then I wouldn't have wasted so much time being afraid of failing. I spent years letting failure define me, letting it convince me that I wasn't good enough, that I should stop trying, that I should take the safer road. And for what? To avoid pain, to avoid discomfort, to avoid the risk of looking foolish. I see it now. Failure was never my enemy. My fear of failure was. And that fear was the real thing holding me back. Once I understood this, everything changed. The 3 biggest failures of my life. There are failures that shape you, that you learn from, that make you stronger. And then there are the ones that change you forever. The ones that leave scars. The ones that, no matter how many years pass, never truly fade. I want to tell you about 3 failures that did more than just hurt. They rewrote who I was. And if I could go back, if I could change anything about my life, these are the moments I would rewrite. Failure number 1, the dream that crushed me, 2025. I was 28 years old when I started my first business. I had no investors, no safety net, just a vision. And I was willing to do whatever it took to make it work. It was a small cafe. I had always loved the idea of a quiet place where people could gather, read books, escape the noise of the world. I spent every dollar I had to rent a space, buy equipment, and hire a small staff. I poured my soul into it. I worked from sunrise to midnight, every single day, barely sleeping, barely eating. I convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, it would all pay off. For the first few months, things seemed promising. Customers came. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. I even allowed myself to believe, just for a moment, that I had made it. And then reality hit me like a brick wall. One by one, the problems started piling up. Rent went up. My expenses became higher than my revenue. A new, bigger coffee chain opened just 2 blocks away, and my regular customers slowly started disappearing. I tried everything: discounts, promotions, long nights spent reworking my menu, but it didn't matter. I was drowning in debt. Then came the worst day of my life. I walked into the cafe one morning, exhausted but determined. I told myself, today will be different. But as I opened the door, I saw a notice taped to the glass. Eviction notice. I had officially lost everything. I remember sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty tables, staring at the walls that I had once painted with so much hope. The same walls that in a few days wouldn't belong to me anymore. I had worked myself to the bone. I had given it everything. And still, it wasn't enough. I thought success was just about effort, that if you worked harder than everyone else, you would make it. No one told me that effort alone isn't enough, that sometimes things go wrong no matter how much you give. And that's when I realized, chasing a dream without balance doesn't make you strong. It makes you blind. It blinds you to the warning signs. It blinds you to your own well-being. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your life chasing something, only to lose yourself in the process. The secret to overcoming failure. If I had to sum up everything I've learned in 50 years, it would be this: failure is not the end. It is the beginning of something greater, if you let it be. We spend so much of our lives running from failure, hiding from it, pretending it doesn't exist, or convincing ourselves that if we just try hard enough, we'll avoid it altogether. But that's not how life works. Failure isn't an obstacle on the path, it is the path. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every disappointment, it all has the potential to teach you, to refine you, to shape you into the person you are meant to become, but only if you let it. I used to think my failures were proof that I wasn't good enough. Now, I see them for what they really are. Proof that I tried, that I cared, that I was willing to take risks, to put myself out there, to chase something greater. And I would rather fail 1,000 times chasing something meaningful than live my life in the safety of never trying at all. So if you are in the middle of failure right now, if you feel like the ground beneath you has collapsed, if you're drowning in doubt, if you are convinced that you will never make it out, listen to me. This is not the end of your story. You are not done yet. Pick yourself up, learn from it, let it fuel you, and then try again. And who knows, maybe one day you'll look back on this moment, the one that feels like it's breaking you, and realize that it was the very thing that made you. Failure is not the end, it's the beginning. The problem is, Most of us were never taught how to fail. We were taught to fear it, to avoid it, to see it as something shameful. But failure is not the enemy. It is not a curse nor a punishment. It is the greatest teacher life will ever give you. And once you understand that, once you stop seeing failure as an obstacle and start seeing it as an opportunity, everything changes. 1. Failure is feedback, not final. There is one truth I wish I had learned earlier. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of it. Every failure is a lesson, a redirection, a signpost telling you, not this way, try another path. The greatest minds in history understood this. Take Thomas Edison. They say he failed over 1,000 times before inventing the light bulb. 1,000 times. Imagine that. Imagine working day after day, watching every attempt collapse, knowing that most people would have walked away after the 10th, the 100th, the 500th failure. But Edison? He didn't quit. He saw failure for what it was. Data. Every mistake was a step forward. Every wrong answer brought him closer to the right one. And in the end, he changed the world. Now ask yourself, how many times have you walked away too soon? How many times have you given up, not because you weren't capable, but because you misunderstood failure? Because you took it personally, instead of treating it like a scientist in a lab, adjusting the formula and trying again? The people who succeed aren't the ones who never fail. They are the ones who learn from failure, adapt, and keep moving forward. Number 2, the only true failure is quitting. There was a man named Harlan Sanders. Most people know him as Colonel Sanders, the founder of KFC. But what they don't know is that before his success, his life was a series of failures. By the age of 65, he had been fired from multiple jobs. His first restaurant went out of business. His second one burned down. His third was destroyed during World War II. He was living off a small social security check, barely able to pay his bills. Most people, by that point, would have given up. But he didn't. Instead, at 65 years old, he got in his car and started traveling from restaurant to restaurant, trying to sell his fried chicken recipe. Do you know how many times he was rejected? 1,009 times. 1,009 doors slammed in his face. 1,009 people telling him he wasn't good enough, that his idea would never work. And yet, he kept going. He refused to quit. And on the 1,010th attempt, someone finally said yes. Today, KFC is one of the biggest restaurant chains in the world, and all of it happened because one man refused to let failure define him. Let me ask you something. How many times have you been rejected before you gave up? 5, 10, 50? What if you stopped one rejection too soon? The truth is, success isn't about talent, it's about endurance. It's about the willingness to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. Because the only true failure is walking away before the story is finished. 3. You can start over at any age. Some people think failure has an expiration date, that if you fail too many times, if you reach a certain age without making it, then it's too late. Let me tell you why that's a lie. Oprah Winfrey was fired from her first job as a TV anchor. They told her she wasn't fit for television. Today, she is one of the most powerful media figures in the world. J.K. Rowling was rejected by 12 publishers before someone took a chance on a book about a boy named Harry Potter. Imagine if she had given up after the 10th rejection. That book went on to sell over 500 million copies, and it all happened because she refused to stop trying. Henry Ford went bankrupt 5 times before he created the company that changed the automobile industry forever. Do you see the pattern? The people who change the world, who build legacies, who rise from nothing, are the ones who never let failure be their final chapter. Maybe you feel like you've wasted years, like you're too old, too far behind, too late to start over. But here's the truth. The only person putting a deadline on your dreams is you. As long as you're breathing, you still have time. And if Colonel Sanders could build an empire at 65, if Vera Wang didn't design her first dress until she was 40, if Morgan Freeman didn't get his first big movie role until he was 52, then what excuse do you have? You are not too old. You are not too late. You are exactly where you need to be if you're willing to keep going. If they could rise from failure, so can you. Think of all the failures in your life, the ones that hurt, the ones that broke you, the ones that made you question everything. Now ask yourself, were they really the end? Or were they just a turning point, a redirection, a lesson you hadn't understood yet? Because here's the truth. If Thomas Edison had stopped after 999 failures, the world would still be in darkness. If Colonel Sanders had given up at 1009 rejections, KFC wouldn't exist. If Oprah had believed her first boss, she would have never become a global icon. If J.K. Rowling had stopped at the 12th rejection, there would be no Hogwarts. So what about you? What will your failure become? A tombstone or a stepping stone? Because the people who succeed in life are simply the ones who refuse to quit. And if they could rise from failure, so can you. So after 50 years of failing, what did I learn? I learned that failure doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. I learned that the moments you think are the end are usually just the beginning. I learned that the biggest regret in life isn't failing, it's never trying at all. And I learned that success is never about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you stand back up. Final wisdom, what I wish I knew sooner. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, the one sitting on the floor of that empty cafe, staring at the eviction notice, the one who missed his mother's last call because he was too busy, the one who lost a friend because he assumed there would always be more time. I would tell him 3 things. 1. Don't fear failure. Fear wasted time. For most of my life, I was afraid of failure. I avoided risks. I hesitated. I let fear make my decisions for me. And in doing so, I wasted years that I will never get back. Fear is a thief. It doesn't just steal opportunities, it steals time. And time is the one thing you will never get more of. So take the risk, make the call, start the business, write the book, say what needs to be said. Because the worst thing in life isn't falling. The worst thing is looking back and realizing you never even tried. Failure is painful, but regret is unbearable. 2. Your greatest success might be just one failure away. I think about this one a lot. How many times did I stop trying when I was so close? How many times did I let exhaustion, frustration, or doubt make the decision for me? I told you the story of Colonel Sanders, who was rejected 1009 times before KFC was born. I told you about Thomas Edison, who failed over 1,000 times before he created the light bulb. I told you about J.K. Rowling, who was turned away 12 times before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon. But what if Colonel Sanders had quit on rejection 1008? What if Edison had walked away after failure 999? What if J.K. Rowling had stopped at publisher number 11? They would have never known how close they were. And neither will you, unless you keep going. You are always closer than you think. Don't let one more failure convince you to stop when success could be waiting just around the corner. 3. You are more than your failures. This one took me the longest to understand, because after enough failures you start to believe that's all you are, that you are the bad decisions, the lost opportunities, the broken dreams. But listen to me. You are not your failures. You are not the cafe that closed, the job you lost, the relationship that fell apart. You are what you choose to become after those things. You are the lessons you carry, the wisdom you gain, the resilience you build. And if you decide right here, right now, that failure will not define you, then nothing and no one can stop you. Because the only way to truly fail is to stop trying. I've lost businesses. I've lost people. I've lost time I can never get back. But after 50 years, I can tell you this. If I had one wish, I would have failed more. Because failure means you tried. It means you lived. You risked something. You put yourself out there, knowing you might fall, but doing it anyway. Failure means you weren't one of the people who sat on the sidelines, too afraid to even start. And when I look back at my life, I don't regret the things I failed at. I regret the things I was too afraid to try. I would have failed more. If it meant I had tried more, dreamed more, lived more. So now I leave you with this question. When your time comes, when you take your last breath, will you be the one who wished they failed more? Or will you be the one who never even tried? The choice is yours. Now I have a question for you. What is your biggest failure? And more importantly, what did it teach you? Because failure only becomes powerful when you learn from it, when you grow from it, when you refuse to let it define you. So tell me, what was the moment that changed your life? The failure that shaped you into who you are today? Leave it in the comments, because your story, your lessons, might be the thing that helps someone else keep going. And if this story spoke to you, if you've ever faced failure and felt like giving up, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the truth is, we all fail. We all struggle. We all have moments where we feel lost. But sometimes all it takes is the right words at the right time to remind us that we are not alone. And if you want more life-changing wisdom, if you want to keep learning, keep growing, keep becoming stronger with every failure, subscribe to this channel. Because this is what we do. We learn, we rise, and we refuse to let failure stop us. Lessons of a lifetime.